So what are we talking about today? Maple Valley, the successor, in the franchise of Creature Comforts from KTBG. Backed it on crowdfunding, played it a few times, gonna let you know my thoughts. It's gonna be a fun one. Let's go. So in case you can't see on the table in front of me right now already, there is a lot of stuff going on here. We have a multifaceted board that you are gonna be maneuvering around. We've got essentially like 3 different piles of cards you're going to be combing through on this side that's not even all in view, and then you have 2 other card situations, one on the board and one next to the board that you're going to be utilizing, filling up, or using to convert resources to another resource. And that's really what this game is in a nutshell. This is a worker placement, heavy resource management game. Now, let me clarify that. Not heavy in the sense that it is a Board Game Geek Wait 4. It is very complicated parts, moving, connecting. No, it's heavy in the sense that this little tray right here that you can see, these are all the resources in this game. There are potentially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 resources. Without the little mini expansion that came on crowdfunding, 11, and a map resource that allows you to move further, potentially 12 different things you're going to be maneuvering, keeping track of, converting, exchanging, and trying to figure out whether or not they're worth it in the first place as you move your little creature path by path by path, collecting, mitigating, resource gathering, friend allying, and a little bit of everything else in between. So what do you need to know? Okay, let's first off talk about how this game plays, right? Like I mentioned, you're going to be using your turns on a turn-by-turn basis to move your creature from spot to spot. Creatures, however, are very limited in what they can do. They're limited by your hand of creatures or friends that you have available to you at any one point in your turn. And you can see the paths on the board are river, dirt, and grass. And your starter has all 3, which means they can move down any one of those. Then your other various friend allies are all going to have 1 or 2 in the upper corner that are going to be where they can move along as well. And when you play a card, that's your turn. That's the path that you're moving along to go from point A to point B. And you may then also get this action down here. Now the friends, as opposed to your starter, are a little bit different as a makeup. They all have action abilities, so this is gain any one of the starter 3 resources. We'll talk about those in a second. And then the rest of them here, if you forage for any of these, also gain any main of starter, and then gain another one. So they all give you slightly different abilities, and then they also give you slightly different victory points here at the end. So as you gather these, though, that's the main crux, because this essentially determines how many times you're going to get to worker place during your turn. So this is the most important resource of them all. And I already ran you through the other 12 that are potentially going to be there. But this is where the crux of the game lies. And on this massive scaling board, there's really only one spot down here way at the bottom that you're going to be able to get those. And those are highly dependent on the market that you have over here. And those are only going to be obtainable by the 3 basic resources. I blow up the player board for you here, and you can see the 3 main resources here: the flowers, the bugs, and the stones. These are my own little individual trackers. These are the map tokens. These will be used to actually achieve some of the various end game scoring objectives. The maps allow you to move an extra space along any path, but these are the 3 that are going to buy your market friends in the first place in the lower left-hand corner. And then you're going to have to use all the other resources to manage everything else you want to do in the game. This game is played over a series of 5 rounds that correspond actually to the well-blended sun tiles up at the top here. And you flip them over to mark what round is there, and also what resource is the ubiquitous sun resource that round. And you can get that resource, and that's going to change round by round. And you go until you play through 5 rounds. Most victory point buffet at the end is going to win. Now on the board, you'll notice that there are 3 separate tree leaves: 1, 2, and 3. And so there are 2 sets of those, and these tokens, these resources, 2 resources at each tree leaf down, they are randomly allocated at the beginning of the game. You just put down whatever token backside matches, and you place them in that area. So that it's completely random on the setup, except for the fact that you're not supposed to have 2 of the same resource at the same location. That's the only caveat or rule there. Then along these paths, several of them, you'll see curiosities. And these curiosities, these blue triangles essentially, correspond to those 3 main ingredients for getting friends in the first place. And that's going to be the main way you get them, by crossing over these paths. You don't pick this up, you just get it anytime you go from this path to this path via the grass, or this path to this path via the water. Rinse and repeat. You also have 2 other locations on the map that are variable depending on which one you want to use each game. And these basically give you different ways of converting resources at these locations that may be a little bit more difficult to get. Some of the honey resources that are harder, the sun resource into the map, and so that's going to be variable again depending on the round. And then you have the canoe carver over here, which again gives you 3 different areas, including ways to trade in your attributes or your skills to get resources in the first place, sort of a reverse. Now let's go to that a second. Let's talk about that so you can see what else we've got going on. Over here, alongside the allies and the friends, you have skills that you'll be learning. And these skills, again, just like the market for the friends, is very nice in the sense that if ever you have duplicates, you get rid of the duplicates, so it keeps the market fresh. And anytime you do that, or anytime at the end of the round, one gets cycled over. And so these skills are going to give you various things that you can do along the way. And they just allow you to manipulate the resources in different ways, travel easier, or gain resources when you're doing other things throughout. But they also give you victory points at the bottom. When you begin your turn entering a round with no cards, draw one. When you play one, also gain a resource. So they give you lots of ways of mitigating some of those circumstances you may find you're in, and it gives you a relatively thick deck, quite the plethora in the first place there. Now, similarly, you have the market deck for the creatures, which are not completely, again, asymmetric or unique, but there's not too many duplicates so that you don't run into it, but you start to get to know them after you play a game or two, as you can see here. And again, all different actions, all different victory points, all different costs and paths in the upper left-hand corner as well. The rewards, and these are sort of your end game objectives. If you have the majority of your little pawn tokens that are going to be given to you at the beginning of the game covering these spaces, then you get the extra bonus here. You get +4 for whatever your total is there at the end. But then as you fill this up, you start to get a reward as well. And these have to actually match which symbol that you're going to be doing. And that's the tricky part here. When you complete these items, which is a whole nother market thing we haven't even covered yet, when you buy them, then whatever corresponds in the upper left-hand corner, you get to place an item down here on one that matches. But you'll notice it scales per player count. So at 2 players, you only have to fill these 4 for it to be done. 3, you need these 6. 4, you need 8, and 5, you need to fill all 10 of these. But you'll notice that on this card in particular, there's only 1 music note. So if I was playing at anything less than 4 players, this card wouldn't get me anything filled on this one, and I would have to hope that the other one that I have out here, the Ghost Stories, has one at my more applicable player count. Now, the tricky part here is with both of these, you actually get awarded more benefits if you're the one that fills the card last, fills in the last spot. As it says here, the finisher searches the deck and get crafts for free. Then clockwise, every other player crafts for free later. So you get your first pick. It's not overbearingly first player oriented, but you definitely get a benefit if you're the last one. Again, from the finisher, each player may spend resources on this card to gain any 2 of the other more hard to get resources. Then the finisher removes all the extras, blah, 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 blah. And so therein lies the dilemma here, because again, we're going back to a third market of item cards, which not only give you victory points, but they also give you synergy potentially between the resources at the end of the game, but also between them. In this case, you get 2 extra victory points if you have the basket along with the peppermints, and you can potentially score them more than once if it goes in the right combination. The tambourine, +2 if you have the fiddle. And so you can get more of these as you go along. This one, +2 if you have the peppermints. The garlands, basket, peppermints, you start to see that there becomes a pattern of which you're trying to get these from this market in addition to the other 2. Now, one tricky caveat I didn't mention here with the actual item cards, you actually have to get the item cards and then build them. So you can store them, but you don't actually get to count any of the victory points here or here until you pay for the side. And so that's slightly different than the other 2 markets where you buy them or acquire them straight up. This one you acquire, but then have to pay for afterwards. So they sit in your storage, so at least someone else can't steal it or get the one you want, but you may have it and it might be tantalizing and close, but you don't have the right combination yet. So when I mention those workers, there's one other last aspect I'll demonstrate here in a second. When you choose one, you get to go and utilize whatever route is here. So when I look at my raccoon here, he gets water, dirt, or forest. So if this is my guy right here, then I could choose basically any path along the route for him, And let's say I will just go to one of these center areas. You have to move, and these center ones in the middle are your slightly better ones with more actions that relate to the cards. Your outside ones are your resources. So he goes over here, I would gather these 2 resources, and then the tricky part comes in. So let's say I, in my hand, have 4 of these workers, and after I've played 3 of them, I have 1 left. But let's say somebody else has not actually gained as many friends as I have. When the round begins, if you have less friends than everybody else, right? That doesn't happen to anybody here in the board gaming world scene. And so then you get a Dawdle card. And anytime during your turn, you can play your Dawdle card, which takes the place of the friend, which means everybody gets the exact same number of worker movements during each round. But this Dawdle card basically skips your whole turn. You get the resources that are listed on this Dawdle card, in this case, like the bread thing and the rock, but you don't actually get to do any of the actions on the board whatsoever. You don't get to move your worker. You don't get to go anywhere. You don't get to utilize any of the cool, actually like useful spots. You just get to whatever you can craft afterwards that's already in your possession, because, you know, that's essentially all you can do. And that's okay, but at the same time, it's kind of lackluster. So you really got to make friends quickly. Yeah, and that happens in this hobby as a whole. So it's really easy. You'll get it fine. So then as you go, you just play your worker friends. You move your character around from place to place to place to place, and you gather those resources, convert them into your skills, gather more friends up, and then slowly whittle and build your crafts to go along with it. That's the game in a nutshell. It plays over 5 rounds. So you know what? Let's talk pros and cons here after several plays. There is a lot of going on. Pro is the fact that these actions are all relatively straightforward. If you are familiar with worker placement or resource management whatsoever, it's going to be second nature in how you're utilizing these things in a combo chaining degree. No issue from that standpoint. I like the skills. The skills are probably the best part of the comboing and the mixed matching of your abilities to manipulate those resources in the first place. They just work well. I love them from that aspect of things. People are going to focus on the aesthetic. I mean, the aesthetic is fine. I don't buy games purely based off of aesthetic reasons, so I'm going to leave it at that. Other pro, there's enough variety in each of these 3 decks so that you really don't feel like, you know, there's an issue from that standpoint whatsoever. And that's even before you get to that last resource of the Raven's Feathers here. So that's not an issue whatsoever. It's relatively easy to learn. You know what? Let's go right into the cons, because this leads me right into that. The cons is because you have each of those 3 decks, right? Now you have an ever-shifting market. It cycles through. I love the fact that it doesn't repeat, but it's also pure market. And you have literally 3 different markets you're going to be having to manage at all times. And the other issue is with these endgame scoring objectives that I mentioned, along with the 2 on the board, they don't always work well together. And so it's fine if you're really good at making lemonade out of lemons, but can you make lemonade out of oranges? Because that's sometimes what you'll find yourself in, as I mentioned, right? At the lower player counts, if you're drawing a bunch of musical items and you're crafting musical items, this one's just going to leave you high and dry. So you really need to pay attention to this, but it's not going to necessarily be easy because the ones down here just may not match up in the first place. The other side of things is because you can only get friends at this one place, friends are actually very, very limited. You know, first couple games, you know, so far, you know, you're maxing out at 4 or 5 friends. You're maxing out at 4 or 5 turns per round. And that's in the rounds 3, 4, and 5, not in rounds 1 or 2. Rounds 1 and 2 are going to be like 10 minutes total. So you're really going fast because you only start off with 2 workers. You essentially go someplace, get resources, go someplace and get resources, and that's your first round. And so that leads me into the other dilemma. When I see games like this, I go, why, if every round is going to be so similar, right? I'm going to go to one of these places that's going to give me 2 resources. I'm going to go to another one of these places that's going to be 2 resources. Maybe I'll go to the place with the map and get me a few maps so I can make a few more strides further along the next round. But it just makes me go, if every round is going to be so similar for the first 2 rounds of almost every game that you play, why not, as I heard a game designer talk about even a couple years ago, skip those first 2 rounds and make the real engaging part the beginning? And that's what this makes me think of. Like, really, you start getting somewhat of an engine into the 3rd round, and 3, 4, and 5 is really where the meat of this game actually entails, where you're actually getting to manipulate the resources. You're being able to traverse a little bit farther. You actually have more than 2 actions in a round, because as cool as some of this stuff is, if you're only doing 2 things per round, that's going to leave you feeling a little bit, well, unsatisfied, a little bit empty in terms of this is a worker placement resource management game, and I'm only getting to do it 2 times in a whole round. And that's almost half the game then when you've played 2 rounds and you've had 4 actions. That's just not necessarily what you're looking for with this. And especially at the higher player counts, I mean, 2 players is fine, right? You're going to maneuver around. There's no blocking. You can be on the same location as somebody else. There's no limitation from that standpoint. But you will, depending on how hard you want to block off people with these endgame scoring objectives, you will have some take that look at, I blocked the spot that you need there. So now you're not going to have the majority and you're not going to get the extra bonus points. So there is some of that from that aspect as well. So if that's not appealing to you, again, more of an FYI. And the other issue with the items, I mean, there's lots and lots of items. It's just pure randomness with this of whether or not you're ever going to see one that matches one of the ones you have. And you can't really count on getting a set collection in this. You just can't. Sometimes, look, I shuffled this like 6 times, and look, you still see 3 costume cards in a row, 2 crockery cards in a row. And so if you just get a portion of that, well, it's going to, even it out, but you may not get to the one that the crockery needs in the first place to score those extra points. So if someone else gets their combo, there's not really a great way to fully mitigate that, leave you, again, wanting. The resource allocation on the board, again, is super random. And it's going to make it highly tactical. Like, there's no big overarching strategy with the randomization of this, these little triangles, these resources. And so you're not going to have the same game twice. That's a huge positive. You're not going to feel like you're rinsing and repeating, but it's also going to make you feel like there's just a lot of confusion going on. Did this game really need 10 different resources to do all of this? Or could some of this been, do I really need this, and this? And 3, understand these are just for the allies and the friends you're recruiting, but this is just a lot going on here, folks. And it's a lot to keep track of. As short as this game should be, it also, at the higher player count, it definitely drags out. Because you're trying to manage all of these 10 ones and trying to figure out, well, I need to go A to B to B to C. So the heavy portion that I mentioned earlier actually gets in there because you just have too many things moving around, too many moving parts in that sense. So a little bit of too much of a good thing at the same time there is going to bog you down at the end. And if you have AP, yeah, I mean, this game could easily take you probably twice the listed board game length of, 60 minutes at probably a 4-player count, maybe even a 3, depending on how familiar and how quick you take your turns. And so this is supposed to be a little bit lighter game overall. And in that sense, it's going to not necessarily match that in terms of length of stay on the table. And as I mentioned, the dawdle cards here, the skip the middle of the round, but get to take some resources instead if every people have more friends than you. I mean, I kind of have mixed feelings on it, right? Yeah, it prevents a runaway leader problem, but only having 1 spot on the board you can get and having it be so difficult to get some of the resources to get the friends in the first place, that's where the rate limiting step of the vast majority of your game is going to be once you realize that. And yeah, it makes it so that you all get even numbers of turns, but it doesn't also reward you for outmaneuvering your opponent. They still get sort of safety netted, which is good. But when you take your turn as the dawdle card, whenever that may be, you just can't really do the main crux of things in the board in the first place. So yeah, it's nice in a sense, but it also misses the main crux of that turn regardless. So again, I have mixed feelings about it from that side of things. So overall, where is my head at this point? I feel like this is, just resource sprawlage. And in some ways it really works with the market and the adaptability there, and really being highly tactical, having a few ways with the skills to mitigate things, but also just kind of a crapshoot of 10 resources randomly splayed all around the board, plus, which ones you're going to go for and which one of these are actually going to be as applicable, and just really dependent on which ones are out there. And that's supposed to be the way to mitigate it. And if you don't have the right one that matches, again, the early rounds are going to speed by and the late rounds are going to lag depending on how your engine is built. The dawdle is a mixed blessing curse for me still. The allies' actions and items are kind of okay. I wasn't overwhelmed. I didn't think there was anything like superbly cool with the items deck. It's just a lot of, if you find this random other card to go along with this set collection that comes up, great. If you get it, great. If you don't, well, okay, we'll get some bonus points without it. Nothing make it or break it. Same thing with the allies. I mean, there's good ones and there's ones that are going to adapt to your strategy, but you're not necessarily going to have all of them available to you. So if your strategy somehow hinges differently than what's available at first, again, you know, you might be a little bit left behind, and there's ways to mitigate that. But overall, I wasn't blown away by it either. It's solid. It's going to be enjoyable for people who are looking for something lighter weight, but at the same time, knowing that your first couple games are probably longer than this mechanical weight may appeal to you from that sense. What I mean by that is the actions are simple and straightforward, but what I'm looking for with a game like this is probably 60 to 75 minutes or less. And I think anything higher than the 2-player count, you're going to be pressed your first couple games to get that at all. And that's a blessing curse, right? A lot of the times we look at these lighter weight games and we say, I like them because I can get them to the table easier. I can get them to the table more frequently. There's not going to be a rules overhead. The rules are smooth, they're elegant, they work well. But if it takes you 2 hours to play this game, something of a similar weight that takes you 30 to 45 minutes, and you have limited game time like I do, well, sometimes you kind of want to play more than one thing, and this one might not appeal, especially with just a heavy reliance of the randomness on the board, in the markets, the resources, the cards, everything along the way. I have no problem with it, but if you're not liking all of those areas that it's ever present in, I can see this one being a complete miss for you as well. It's completely different than Creature Comforts. You don't have to worry about both of them, you know, competing for table space. The mechanistic approach from both of them is completely different. There's no overlap. You could have both of them in your collection without any issue. But do you want both of them in your collection? That's the question you have to ask yourself. So truth be told, at this point, I don't actually know if I'm going to keep this one in my collection. I just didn't feel like it hit as home as well as what I was looking for. I just didn't feel like it was as fun having to mathematically try and convert so many resources so many times. Gave me a little bit more of a headache than I'd care to admit. Not that it was difficult, but just so much in that sense. So I could easily see this one staying, but I could also see myself getting rid of it very shortly too, just because I don't necessarily always see it hitting the table over other things of similar weight, ilk, or just my type. So there you go. Maple Valley, my thoughts, questions, concerns, and comments. Hopefully helpful. Let me know what you think. As always, there you go. Subscribe if you want. Peace out. Stay classy. See you around.